So the next person that I'm introducing is Alison, and Alison Birchall, with a Masters in International and Community Development on top of her Bachelor degree in Social Work and a wealth of on-the-ground experience, has a solid foundation for the work that she now does as the Policy Advisor at Domestic Violence Victoria. Please welcome Alison.
Thank you. Thank you, Donna. Yes, I'm the Policy Advisor at Domestic Violence Victoria. Domestic Violence Victoria is the statewide peak body for specialist family violence services. And within my portfolio at DV Vic, I have been working on family violence in emergencies as part of that work. As you're probably aware, or maybe you're not, family violence the family violence sector is undergoing unprecedented reform in Victoria at the moment. And I've commented to a couple of people that it's actually really great to sort of step sideways from my own sector and be in this new space talking about family violence. So thank you for having me. Now I've got to drive this thing. Okay. So in DV Vic's recent advocacy with government on the review of the family violence in emergencies policy, which Rachel actually referred to in her presentation, I've come back time and time again to this quote, which is from Deb and Claire's seminal research on family violence in the aftermath of Black Saturday fires. It's from a domestic violence crisis line worker who, Deb and Claire wrote, is still haunted by the memory of a call she received from a woman the night before Black Saturday. When I read it, it stayed with me too, and has been the starting point for a lot of my advocacy and advice to government on the issues of family violence family violence policy in responding to emergencies. So just reading that end bit there, she said that her plan was always to leave early, but tonight, after abusing her, her partner took the keys to the car and said, "I hope there is a bushfire tomorrow and I hope you die in it." And then he took the car and left, and she had no other plan for getting away. I think this quote and the other examples like this speak to family violence, speak to more than family violence as an aftermath of emergencies and disasters. To me, it illustrates how the experience of gender inequality and family violence increases the vulnerability of women and children during an emergency and prompts us to think about family violence emergency management strategies that go beyond recovery and aftermath, to look at the vital need to integrate family violence into emergency planning and response. So just to sort of, I guess, set the picture a little bit more, I don't want to go into a huge number of statistics, but I think it's important that we think about actually who we're talking about here, and the statistics for Australia tell us that a quarter of women in our community are experiencing physical or sexual violence perpetrated by an intimate partner. And a quarter of women are also experiencing emotional abuse perpetrated by an intimate partner. Of course, within these groups of women, there are groups of survivors who are more vulnerable to experiencing family violence, including Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, women with disabilities who are more likely to experience family violence more severely and frequently. And so these are groups of women that exist in communities that are affected by disaster. What these statistics also speak to is a range of effects of family violence, including injuries, fear, threats of violence that are used to control and coerce women's choices, actions and freedom. There are children who have witnessed or have themselves been harmed or used as a tactic to control women. There are women who are experiencing low sense of self-worth, have low sense of capacity, a sense of powerlessness and a sense of lack of autonomy, all of which might impact on how women living with intimate partner violence experience or respond in a disaster. So this makes me think of what should be some key policy messages in this space. So thinking firstly about emergencies, increasing the risk, severity and frequency of family violence, I think this is something that we all are familiar with now, this idea that emergencies, that disasters are known to have direct and indirect impacts on gender-based violence, particularly men's violence against women and girls, and specifically intimate partner violence. What we tend to think about less, but is just as relevant, is that family violence increases vulnerability to the effects of emergencies. Women and children are already experiencing family violence. The dynamics, tactics and effects of family violence increases their vulnerability during the time of emergency. For example, having no access to transport, communication devices or money as a tactic of family violence, which may make women and children more vulnerable at the time of an emergency. A woman's mobility might be diminished as a result of an injury from physical assault. She may be being intentionally isolated as a tactic of family violence, which means that she's separated from her community and support networks. She may be fearful to leave her home due to threats and intimidation from her partner, or fear if they leave and there is a loss of property, livestock, etc., that this will be used by their partner to justify further violence. They may be so disempowered or unsafe as a result of the violence they're unable to make a decision about evacuating. And they may be made vulnerable in other ways as a tactic of violence, and of course may also be very reluctant to seek help, particularly if their partner is a first responder. So thinking about policy and practice in this area, in Australia and internationally, there's an emphasis on responding to family violence in recovery from emergencies and disasters. And when I say that, I acknowledge that it's only a newly emerging emphasis. The emergence of our collective knowledge and understanding of this is important and drives practice thinking like how to manage intervention orders in recovery centres, how to resource services to respond to an increase in family violence referrals post-disaster, what skills and knowledge the disaster workforce need to be trauma and family violence informed, what social marketing needs to be done in an aftermath of disaster, and who should be involved in disaster briefings and so on. And while I don't wish at all to detract from the importance of that, I feel that the focus on recovery implies that family violence or intimate partner violence isn't an issue before or during an emergency, that it's not an issue to consider in planning, preparedness and response, that it's only a concern for after the emergency, and that family violence won't have an impact during the disaster. If men's violence against women and the particular needs of survivors of family violence are not addressed in preparedness and planning, then women and children's vulnerability during disasters to both family violence and the emergency will increase. An increased focus on family violence in recovery cannot come at the expense of addressing family violence in planning and preparation, as well as individual response. Further, the current policy approach focuses exclusively on mainstreaming gender and family violence in emergency management policy and practice. I believe this misses a really huge opportunity to resource the specialist family violence sector to prepare, plan and respond to emergencies by integrating emergency management knowledge and skills into their practice, and that specialist family violence services and emergency management partnerships and coordination throughout the emergency management spectrum should be the goal. So what might this look like? Yeah, it's the last slide. So specialist family violence services could include emergency management risk, emergency management and risk assessment and risk management and safety plans. That it's important that the specialist family violence services are equipped to take the type of calls that Rachel showed in that community service announcement from 1800 RESPECT. The relationships between specialist family violence services and emergency management services should be developed before the emergency and maintained throughout emergency planning and response. We should invest in transforming masculinity in emergencies as a prevention of family violence in emergency strategy. Preparedness messaging and tools should target survivors of family violence as a key audience. Emergency information and warnings could speak directly to survivors of family violence as a vulnerable group and to the people who know them. Emergency transport could be provided to transport survivors to refuges. So my hope is that when I see emergency broadcast messages in the future on TV or social media, that I'll hear Craig Lapsley or other people speak directly to survivors of family violence and the people who know them and say, if you know women and children who are isolated, vulnerable or unsafe in this emergency as a result of family violence, then the time to help them is now. Thank you.